We at Sentry never stop cooking, but the JavaScript SDK team has outcooked us all. So that's why I want to take a few minutes and show you what they've been cooking on. All right, let's go ahead and check out the menu. We're going to go through this blog post written by Lucas from the SDK team on improving browser tracing step by step. So this is basically all the cool features shipped by the SDK team summarized into one single blog post. And this is not a public blog post. This is published on our company internal blog. So I'm going to let you in. Don't tell anyone, okay? All right, so let's begin. The first thing that I want to share with you is explicitly ending the page load span. So historically, we have been marking the page load spans as idle spans. That means you don't start them and you don't explicitly finish them. They are idle spans, they get started by the SDK automatically, and once or as long as there are other spans starting and stopping, it continues to live on. But after a defined period of inactivity, the idle span will end itself. So this covers like 95% of all the use cases, but to get those last 5%, we actually shipped an API called report page loaded. So you can manually mark when the page has finished loading instead of relying on the SDK. Okay, so in order to use that, first you need to update the SDK to version 10.13.0, and then inside of the browser tracing integration, you should enable the enable report page loaded. Set that to true, and then you can use the report page loaded function in the exact place where you know that the page has finished loading. So all control is given to you. Make sure you add the report page loaded for every page or inside of your router if you have a custom router. So you might be asking yourself, what if I enable manual page loads reporting but never actually report any page loads? Will I still have tracing? Yes, you will. There is another timer, which is like the final timer or final timeout. I think it's at 30 seconds in the SDK. It is configurable though. So after that one passes, the page load will automatically get, the span itself will automatically get ended and it will be sent to Sentry. So you're still good. But if you enable manual reporting, make sure you actually report the page loads. All right, moving on to the next one. Active spans outside of callbacks. This has been shipped in version 10.15.0, which at the recording of this video is the latest right now, and this is a really cool one. So before version 8, we used to have this start child function that created a span for us and it returned it so that we can manually finish it later on wherever we wanted it to finish. But since version 8 and introduction of OpenTelemetry, we have this start span API, which starts a span but into a callback. So we've been getting a lot of feedback on accessing this span that we're starting from outside of the callback. And yeah, to make that happen, we actually pushed an official API called set active span in browser. Okay, so this is how you're going to achieve this. You can declare your route span or whatever span you're trying to create, and then you're going to start an inactive span. And you're going to use this API to gain access to or to initialize the span you're starting, so you can have the instance of that span. But you're going to use the set active span in browser API to make the inactive span and turn it into active span. All right, so from this point on, any span that we're starting is going to be a child span of that route span that we have here. Okay, and because we have access, or we have the span's instance, we can end it wherever we want and make sure to end it, because this is still an inactive span, and inactive spans need to manually be ended. And yes, why the long name? Because we want the users to think twice where they're using this set active span. It only works in the browser. So set active span in browser should not happen on the server, should not happen on, I don't know, mobile apps or anywhere else except in the browser. So yeah, there we go. We can now access active spans outside of callbacks. All right, next up we have redirects versus navigations. And there has been 2 efforts to ship this in 9.37.0 and 10.3.0. And the idea is that up until this point, we were having problems differentiating between an automatic redirect and a navigation. All right, so the automatic redirect is, for example, when you, I don't know, navigate to the dashboard page, but you're not logged in, so you get thrown to the login page. That is an automatic redirect, right? It's not a user action. You got thrown there because you're not logged in, and you can't access the dashboard if you're not logged in. Because it's not a user action, we should not be starting a new root span, which is what we've been doing. But now, since 10.3.0, we are differentiating between navigation redirects and just plain navigations. So you're going to start seeing these navigation.redirect spans into your traces. And shout out to Francesco for shipping this. All right, the next one is probably the biggest one, according to me. So ignoring spans. If I had $1 every time someone asked me how to ignore specific individual spans, I wouldn't have to work anymore. I wouldn't be here making this video. But yeah, ignoring spans, it's finally here. There has been 3 efforts to push this out the door in 9.23.0, 9.25.0, and finally in 10.2.0. And there's a lot of kudos and shoutouts here. But check this out. If you update to 10.2.0, you get ignore spans inside of the init object. Okay, this will let you ignore spans with the name, I don't know, /help or this regex. Or you can even provide an object to match based on the name and the operation, on that combination. So both name and operation. The previous efforts included ignore resource spans, which got shipped in 9.23.0, and shout out to Ben Co for shipping that. And that means we could ignore all of these resource.whatever spans, resource.script. We have resource.other, etc. So if you don't need those resource spans, you could have done ignore resource spans. There was also ignore performance API spans. But finally, with ignore spans, you have full control. You have full control into ignoring whatever span you want. Just make sure you're matching the name or the operation or the name and operation. Again, shout out to Francesco for shipping this massive feature. And let's check out the next one. Resource span timing information. So we mentioned resource spans. We've gotten feedback that not everybody finds them useful. So let's make them useful. We started sending the entire request lifecycle events as part of the span attributes to those resource spans. So for example, we are loading, I don't know, an image or a JavaScript static file or CSS or whatever. We're going to start seeing these numbers right here for the connection start, for the domain lookup, for when the fetch started, if there was a redirect, when the response started and response ended, and even there's a time to first byte. So we are attaching a time to first byte for every resource individually, and that's going to help you debug any slow CDN issues you might have. So if your CDN is slow, then your time to first byte is going to be pretty big, and that's how you know. That's how you know that you need to look into that. All right, the last one is Web Vital updates, and this is also a huge one. So we are shipping standalone Web Vital spans. Why? Because for LCP and CLS, they have been reported when the page load span ended. But chances are they're going to stabilize after the page finishes loading. But in this case, they won't get reported, or those values won't get reported. So that's why we decided to rip them out and push them as individual spans. So in your trace view, you're going to start seeing the UI Web Vital LCP and UI Web Vital CLS spans showing up in your traces, which is going to be pretty cool. In order to use these, you're going to need to enable the underscore experiments, because these are still experimental. They require a more recent self-hosted version of Sentry than the SDK currently requires, but this is going to be marked as not experimental in the next major version of the SDK, which is going to be version 11. And a huge shout out to Edward for adding support for standalone spans in Relay and in the product. So that's what I wanted to show you. This is probably one of my favorites SDK ships so far. We have some really cool features. We have been implementing the feedback that you have been giving us. So yeah, I hope you liked this. See you in the next one.